Tonight at 10, Labour's election manifesto is formally approved by the party leadership and will be published within days. After a 4-hour meeting, Jeremy Corbyn said the programme had been unanimously agreed, carefully costed and would be very popular. The likely offer to voters includes nationalising the rail network and abolishing university tuition fees in England.
An offer that will transform the lives of many people in our society and ensure that we have a government in Britain on June the 8th that will work for the many, not the few.
But earlier, Mr Corbyn had failed to attend Labour's big poster launch amid confusion over a leaked version of the Labour manifesto. We'll be looking at some of Labour's policies in more detail and we'll be talking to voters in York. Also tonight, a squeeze on consumer spending in prospect. The Bank of England downgrades its forecast for economic growth this year. Official figures suggest waiting times for some NHS services in England are the worst in 5 years.
He's a showboat, he's a grandstander.
President Trump lays into his former FBI director and says he always intended to sack him.
And coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, Andy Murray is knocked out of the Madrid Open in the last 16 by Borna Coric, so he's failed to reach the quarter-finals in 2 of his last 3 events.
Good evening. Labour's election manifesto has been formally approved by the party leadership and will be published next week. Jeremy Corbyn said the policies would be fully costed and would prove to be very popular with voters. Some of those policies had already been revealed after a version of the document was leaked overnight, and it included proposals to renationalise the railways and to scrap university tuition fees in England. Our political editor Laura Kuenssberg has more on the campaign events of the day.
They wondered what exactly was going on, and you might too. This was meant to be the grand unveiling of a Labour poster, albeit on a waste ground in South London. But the party leader was nowhere to be seen.
It's got a terrific slogan.
Jeremy Corbyn should have been selling the slogan. He'd been promised as top billing. But after the astonishing leak of a draft of Labour's complete manifesto,
Also, you look at the pensioners.
we were told he had other things to do.
Mr Lavery, Mr Gwynne, where's Mr Corbyn?
We know
He
it.
was meant to be here, Mr Lavery.
He was meant to be here, but those things happened, and Mr Corbyn is dealing with internal matters.
Do you know who leaked your manifesto, Mr McDonnell?
No, we don't.
Mr Corbyn's closest ally was promising great things.
This is an extremely modern, progressive set of proposals, and it's looking to the long-term future, and most people are extremely excited at what they've seen.
The 45-page draft we've seen spells out plans to nationalise the railways, Royal Mail and parts of the energy industry, to abolish tuition fees in England, to restore some welfare benefits and scrap the bedroom tax, and to provide £8 billion for social care.
Are you angry with the allegations that your staff leaked the manifesto?
In a frenzy over who told the world,
Are you responsible for the leak?
Oh, don't be silly.
What do you make of the leak?
Oh, that was naughty, wasn't it?
Labour shadow ministers, officials and union bigwigs were due to arrive to sign it off.
We're here today to decide the final version, and I'm sure it'll be an exciting programme that could attract as many voters as possible to the Labour Party.
I'm absolutely certain that ordinary Labour voters want an increase in the minimum wage, the abolition of zero-hour contracts, agency workers dealt with, investment in our industries,
nationalisation
of the railways.
Eventually, the leaders sped in to dot the I's and cross the T's. Inside, Labour's top brass discussed tax rises for the very wealthiest and big business, a ban on fracking, ending arms sales to Saudi Arabia, but no ban on nuclear weapons. And after 4 hours, it was eventually agreed. A plan described as the biggest intervention in the state since the 1970s. But is that how he sees it?
I'm naturally to the centre.
I'm naturally to the centre, he says. But for how Labour will pay for his grand plans, we'll have to wait.
We've just concluded our meeting, our joint meeting of the Shadow Cabinet and the National Executive, and we've discussed our manifesto for the general election. Our manifesto will be an offer, and we believe the policies in it are very popular. An offer that will transform the lives of many people in our society. The details will be set out to you, including the costings of all the pledges and promises that we make.
But the National Manifesto, this seeming chaos, for some of his candidates makes not much difference. Listen to this.
Let's get real. The Tories are 20 points ahead in the polls. It's the Tory manifesto people need to be focusing on, seeing what they're doing in government. And we Labour MPs are trying to save as many good Labour MPs as possible, so we have a semblance of an opposition after June the 8th.
Manifesto timing slip-ups aside, this is less radical than Jeremy Corbyn and his core supporters might have wished. The task now to persuade voters of its merits.
Ultimately, what matters is not the clamour over the leak, but what you make of what Labour has to offer.
Can you get back, please? Sorry, can I get through, please?
Jeremy Corbyn's hope, the more people understand of him, the more they'll like. His internal rivals in the Labour Party fear the opposite is true. And it's already been a bumpy journey. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, one of the policies that Labour believes will appeal to a broad section of the public is the plan to renationalise the railway network. In the draft manifesto document, the party talks of making a publicly owned rail system the backbone of its transport policy. It would be a gradual process of taking over the commercial agreements and franchises as they expired. Labour is also proposing to freeze rail fares. Our transport correspondent Richard Westcott has been looking at Labour's rail plan and how it might work.
Britain's railways are bitty and complex. Most of the track, signals and stations are run by Network Rail. It's effectively a nationalised company spending public money. The trains are run by a mixture of private companies and foreign state railways, including France, Germany, Holland and Hong Kong. At the moment, different companies can bid to run different rail services for a limited number of years. It's called a franchise. What Labour seems to be suggesting is that as each of those franchises runs out, rather than having a new bidding process, the government will take over those services instead. There are 18 franchises in total. The first one, South West Trains, comes up for renewal in August. Overall, 11 franchises, including famous names like Great Western Railways, could be taken into public ownership by the end of the next Parliament. But some contracts don't finish until well into the 2020s, and the Caledonian Sleeper Service won't be renewed until 2030. Opinion polls suggest nationalisation is popular.
I'm for nationalisation because I think it'll make it cheaper than what it is at the moment, and because the train prices are ridiculous.
I think it's been proven in the past that nationalised rail services don't meet the standards of customer expectations. They've had safety issues in the past as well.
British Rail. We're getting there.
The old publicly owned British Rail had a mixed reputation. So why do campaigners think nationalising the trains would make things better?
We'd be able to reduce fares and improve services. We could add carriages, we could reopen lines, we could make our railway better.
In 2009, East Coast services were taken over by the government for a few years because a private company made a mess of the franchise. Labour's often hailed it as proof that nationalising a line can improve the service. But the former boss of that publicly owned company disagrees.
It was a success, yes, but I would say that was despite being in the public sector rather than because of it. We made it work, it was quite hard to do it, but we ran it as if it was a private sector company. And we returned over £1 billion in profits to the Treasury during the time that we were running it. But the new franchisee that replaced us has promised far more money over a longer period of time, with new trains to introduce new services.
A slow takeover of passenger services is the cheapest option for nationalisation. But if Labour wants to buy back the privately owned trains, it could cost billions. Richard Westcott, BBC News.
Well, one of the other major elements of Labour's draft manifesto is education and the pledge to abolish university tuition fees in England. They were first introduced by the Labour government back in 1998, but in 2012, under the Conservative Lib Dem coalition, they were increased to £9,000 a year. Our education editor, Branwen Jeffries, reports on the likely impact of scrapping tuition fees and how much the policy could cost.
Universities like Nottingham Trent are part of a revolution. Tuition fees have paid for many more places, but it's students who face 30 years of paying back loans. So do they welcome the idea of scrapping fees?
I think it'd be a good thing, but how are they going to pay for it?
Getting rid of them doesn't really make a difference. More the living costs that would probably sway people going to uni or not.
Well, I think obviously that's brilliant if they actually do it. For everyone who's going into education, but obviously for me, I'm going to graduate in a couple of weeks.
A quarter of students here from England's poorest families, managing on less than £15,000 a year. So does it matter who pays for their courses?
From a university point of view, we want enough money to provide a high-quality education. Whether that comes from government grants or from student loans is a matter for the politicians. I think it's great that this debate is now part of the general election campaign.
Each time tuition fees go up, applications initially drop, but in the long term it hasn't put young people off. In 2007, when fees were £3,000, 305,000 students accepted a place. By 2016, when fees were £9,000, 394,000 signed up. It would cost around £7.5 billion to replace loans with government spending. The reason it isn't more is taxpayers are still paying some of the cost. The majority of students will never fully repay their loans. Tuition fee increases have provoked protest. The outrage overflowed when they tripled under the coalition. Tuition fees have become a symbol of fairness between the generations. Students look at older people and see they got a free university education, cheaper housing, better pensions. They ask why they're not getting the same deal. Scotland is the only part of the UK with no tuition fees. The number of university places is limited. Wealthier students are more likely to get places, a bigger gap than England. Food for thought in the tuition fee debate. Bronwyn Jeffries, BBC News.
Well, Labour, as we heard earlier, says its programme is modern and progressive, not to return to the past, as some critics have alleged, and that voters will respond positively in the coming weeks as they see the party's ambition. So our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, went to York today, a Labour seat being targeted by the Conservatives, to see what voters are saying there.
An act of faith, Labour's manifesto, true believers spreading the word of socialism. In places like York, with its 7,000 Labour majority, the party must hold and grow if it can. So much of Labour's programmes divisive, could cause potential support to walk away.
Labour, they don't want to put a clear limit on immigration from Europe. What do you think? You happy with that or are you unhappy?
They're just coming to use NHS for free, you know, they get housing funding for free, benefits for free. It's too easy.
I agree with that, but if they're coming over and they're going to get a job and everything, either way, then it's fine.
And for so many, it's about the economy, isn't it always? More tax if you can easily afford it, or would that just punish success, mess up Britain's prosperity?
Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party, are saying get more tax out of people who earn the most. What do you think?
No. I think if you go to university, do a master's, work hard, you shouldn't have to pay more tax.
But if you've got more money, why not pay a bit more for services?
Because you've done essential things to earn that.
If I was earning that much, I'd want to be doing my bit for everyone else. I don't need that much money in my life.
As for returning more power to the unions...
I remember the 70s. I remember going to work and literally working in candlelight to go home just in time for everything to go off there as well.
Yeah. You think this would be a step down that road?
Well, I think it was, because again, you're going back to the few in the unions who are dominant, controlling the many.
We love our railways. When they're running properly, why not renationalise Royal Mail too? Well, maybe going back to a state-owned rail service is rather sentimental, even an eccentric idea.
Well, the state did a reasonable job in the past, but previously the private corporations have done perhaps an even better job. So I think the guys who are more motivated to do the job should be the ones to run it.
Yeah, why do you think a lot of people are happy with the idea of nationalising railways?
Because railways are a treasure, aren't they? We do love our railways.
So it's nostalgia?
It's absolutely nostalgia, yes.
But in a pick and mix of Labour policies, rail nationalisation is popular.
The investment hasn't gone in over the years. So if the private sector can't do it, then it's left to the public sector. So I, for one, I'd be fine with that, no problem at all.
If this election was a shopping trip, there's a lot of Labour policy people seem to fancy. Nationalise the railways, tax the rich. But the hardest currency on polling day is public trust. And Jeremy Corbyn needs to do better in that marketplace than he's done in the past if Labour ideas are to count for much on June the 8th. John Pienaar, BBC News, York.
And John is back at Westminster tonight. John, we've heard Mr Corbyn say today that this programme has been carefully costed. It'll be set out in the manifesto. What do you make then of the political challenges around a programme like this?
Well, from all we've seen, idea by idea, there's a lot in this plan which is potentially popular. Richer people and corporations paying more in tax, hard-pressed schools and hospitals getting more money after 7 long years of austerity. And never imagine that these ideas are there simply because they may be vote catchers. Jeremy Corbyn believes deeply that society is unfair, that markets have failed, that the deck's been stacked by and for the haves and against the have-nots. And his solution is the creed of socialism, in which his belief is unshakable, and he'll carry on believing whatever happens in this election. The challenge is to convince the unconvinced that these plans are practicable and affordable. And there's still more we'd like to see on that. How much will higher earners have to pay in tax? What about wealth and property taxes? What more is there to learn about all of that? And there are deeper questions. Could this plan shake sterling? Could it shake share prices? What about interest rates and ultimately livelihoods and jobs? In the end here, it comes down to faith, which Jeremy Corbyn has in abundance, and in public trust, which as of now he presently lacks and needs to build up, if this whole plan is to become a radical plan for government and not simply end up as a sort of curiosity left over after a failed political experiment on June the 8th.
John, again, thanks very much. John Pienaar there with some thoughts at Westminster for us, our Deputy Political Editor. Quick reminder for you, you can keep up to date with all the developments throughout the campaign, live events, analysis on the BBC News website, bbc.co.uk/news. And if you're on the move, well, you can follow the election using the BBC News app. Now, the Bank of England has warned of a squeeze on household incomes this year as the cost of living rises faster than wages. The bank's governor, Mark Carney, said he expected only moderate growth for the UK economy. And looking further ahead, he said better prospects depended on the government securing a smooth exit from the European Union. Our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed, is here with me with more details.
Thanks very much, Hugh. Now, today's report actually can be summed up in about 7 words. Short-term negative, longer-term more positive. Global growth is looking better, and the bank says it's working on the assumption that EU deal will work out. But the governor started with a warning about where we are now.
This is going to be a more challenging time for British households over the course of this year. Real income growth, to use our terminology, will be negative. To use theirs, wages won't keep up with prices.
Consumers are split between the worried and those that see more positives ahead.
No matter what you go in to buy nowadays, even shops or even, for the animals, no matter what, everything has gone up in price.
I do think it's going to get worse when Brexit hits hard. So I'd say I'm not really looking forward to the consequences of Brexit.
We're seeing stability in the UK, and that's a positive thing. I think the economy is actually on the turn, on the way up.
I think you've got no choice but to kind of look where your money is going in terms of like shopping, spending, holiday prices obviously going up as well.
It's those rising prices the bank is focusing on, saying it expected inflation to rise to 2.8% by the end of the year. That is in sharp contrast with the rise in earnings, which will languish at just 2%. Over the next 2 years, more positive news, with a growth upgrade for both 2018 and 2019. The bank also insists wage growth will bounce back.
Governor, you've spoken about this sharp squeeze on living standards this year. Why are you so confident that that will come to an end and that wage growth will hit 3.75%, you suggest, by the end of 2019?
We're conditioning on a smooth process, Brexit process, and the extent to which uncertainty over that process is temporarily weighing on wages, that should dissipate.
A final thought on interest rates. If the economy does strengthen, The bank said rates might go up more quickly than some expect. But, as Mr Carney made clear, that all depends on achieving that smooth Brexit deal. Hugh.
Kamal, thanks very much again. Kamal Ahmed there, our economics editor. Now, hospital waiting times in England are at the worst level for 5 years, according to a study of the latest NHS data. The Health Foundation, that's a charity which conducts specialist research into health policy, said that key targets were being missed. There were longer waits for accident and emergency, for cancer treatment and routine operations. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, has been examining the findings.
Jim has prostate cancer. He faced long delays between seeing his GP, going for tests and then having surgery. He's one of a growing number of patients in England who've endured long waits for cancer treatment.
It affected every part of my life. It affected my personal life, my work life, because you're waiting around and it becomes more and more clear that you've got something wrong with you. So I went for so long without any treatment at all.
At least 85% of patients should start cancer treatment within 62 days of being referred, but that target hasn't been met in England since late 2015.
In a civilised country, the NHS has to do better for cancer patients. People shouldn't be waiting more than 62 days for treatment. They deserve much, much better.
According to the Health Foundation think tank, waiting times for key services in England were the worst in 5 years. 26,000 patients had to wait longer than the 2-month target to start cancer treatment. That compares with 14,300 in 2011-12. The number waiting more than the 4-hour target for being treated or assessed in A&E was 2.5 million, a sharp increase on the 725,000 with long waits 5 years before. Against a backdrop of rising patient numbers and stretched resources, it's getting harder for the NHS in England to hit its key performance targets, which are supposed to provide reassurance of high-quality care for patients.
More and more people are needing to use the NHS. That's not new and it's not unexpected. As a population, we're getting older, there are more of us, and our health needs are more complicated. But demand on the NHS has historically risen by around 4% per year, whereas from 2009-10, funding has only risen by around 1% per year.
NHS England said the March figures were better than preceding months, but over recent years there's been a steady decline. Whoever forms the next government will have to face up to that. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
3 women, including a mother and daughter, have appeared in court in London, charged with terrorism offences and conspiracy to murder. It's believed to be the first alleged all-female jihadist plot in Britain. One of them was shot during the operation to arrest them last month. The 3 were accused of planning a knife attack in the Westminster area. Now, President Trump appears to have changed his explanation for sacking the head of the FBI, James Comey. The White House had insisted that Mr. Trump acted on advice from the US Justice Department. But in a television interview this evening, Mr. Trump said that he'd been intending to sack Mr. Comey in any case because the agency, in his words, was in turmoil. Our North America editor, John Sopel, is in Washington. John, it's the president's first interview since this crisis broke.
Yes, it is. And the president was in characteristically forthright mood. I'm sure there'll be one day where I'll say he pulled his punches, but he certainly didn't in this interview. He accused James Comey of being a showboat, a grandstander. He'd left the FBI in turmoil. But what I thought was most interesting was the explanation. On Tuesday night, Wednesday, we were being told the reason he was fired was because the Deputy Attorney General had recommended there needed to be change at the top. And even in Donald Trump's letter sacking James Comey, he said, "I've received the attached letters from Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General recommending your dismissal. I have accepted their recommendation." But listen to what he says in the interview.
Monday, you met with the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein.
Right.
Did you ask for a recommendation?
What I did is I was going to fire Comey. My decision. It was not...
You had made the decision before they came in the room.
I was going to fire Comey. There's no good time to do it, by the way.
Because in your letter you said I accepted their recommendation.
Yeah, well,
so you had already made the decision.
I was going to fire regardless.
And the White House also said that one of the reasons that he was fired was that the rank and file members of the FBI were unhappy with him as their leader. But that was contradicted today by the acting director, who was giving testimony before a Senate committee. And the White House have also said today that the other thing that President Trump wanted to do was to see the Russia investigation completed. And yet the President has tweeted this evening that the Russia investigation is making America look like a laughingstock to the Russians. You pays your money and you takes your choice, Hugh.
Indeed, John, thanks very much again. John Soper there with the latest for us in Washington. Now, Michel Barnier, the man who will lead the Brexit negotiations on behalf of the European Union, has warned that one of the consequences of the UK leaving the EU could be the introduction of customs controls between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. Monsieur Barnier, speaking in Dublin today, said he was aware of the concerns about this and said that he'd be working to avoid the creation of what's being called a hard border. Our special correspondent, Fergal Keane, has travelled from Belfast to Dublin to hear what people think about the possible impact of the Brexit process.
As they have every spring, Brexit or no Brexit, the Orange Men parade through Belfast. No longer do these marches bristle with the menacing energy of the Troubles years. But there is mounting uncertainty. At the same time as the collapse of power sharing here, nationalist resentment over Brexit has spurred demands for a referendum on Irish unity, leaving unionists uneasy.
Do you ever think, at the back of your thoughts, that eventually it's going to happen?
I think it's always a possibility there, but I have to say, I think those are defeatist attitudes. I've heard people recently say, who surprised me, and said, you know, would it be any worse off? And I think that's what propaganda does. But hopefully the unionist community will see through those things and get back to where their first love is, and that remains the Queen and country.
The armed conflict has been over for 20 years. The agony brought to an end by a compromise which allowed all sides to feel their aspirations were respected. Brexit has complicated that. 40 miles south of Belfast, on the border, the debate has stirred painful memories.
And I, as a child, remember sitting in the back, turning that corner we've just turned, looking down this road and just seeing...
Damien McGinnity is a South Armagh farmer.
Of maybe about 18 or 20 paratroopers and 4 or 5 RUC.
This militarised frontier vanished with the Troubles. But any kind of hard border with customs posts and identity checks could be economically costly and politically divisive.
What happens if you get a hard border here again? What's that going to do?
That's a scary thing. That Ireland is just one country. Now, if you stick any kind of a hard border along that 300-mile stretch, you're saying to a sizable chunk of the population, young people here, that this country is being repartitioned.
The Republican dead memorialised on a border road heading south. Now, nobody I met feared a return to violence. But Irish history is an enduring lesson in unintended consequences, of how political decisions play out in the long run. Dublin has persuaded the EU to guarantee membership to the North if Ireland unites. A former cabinet minister makes the economic case for unity to Ulster Protestants.
Do you think that in our lifetime there will be a united Ireland?
I think there may be. I think it will be something.
Maybe. See, you wouldn't have said that 10 years ago, would you?
10 years ago, I would have thought that a united Ireland was a very distant possibility. Now I think it's a more real possibility, and the reason I believe that is that the economic interests of the people of both sides in Northern Ireland and both parts of Ireland are coming together rather than being divided, and I think that Brexit underlines the common interests that Irish people have as opposed to the interests of the Tory party in Britain.
But unity doesn't inspire universal enthusiasm in the south. In my home city of Cork, Na Piarsaigh Hurling Club was named after the rebel martyr Patrick Pearse. The club symbol, the red hand of Ulster, but minus a thumb, symbolises a divided Ireland.
Do people around here really care about a united Ireland?
Well, I suppose some people do, but in this area the people are probably more worried about hand to mouth and how they exist day to day rather than the United Ireland. We're 280 miles away from the north, so from a day to day it doesn't really affect us here,
60 years, Eamon de Valera was the most prominent political...
The old story of Britain and Ireland was one of often bitter entanglement, as the graves at Glasnevin Cemetery remind us. But there are more recent memorials here, to the sacrifice of Irish Catholics and Protestants in the Great War, Peace has made joint remembrance possible.
So much of Ireland's history is interred in this place, from revolution to reconciliation in our time. Walking through these graves, it's still possible to marvel at the fact that peace has been achieved on this island and that healing between divided communities has begun.
It's not that a new armed conflict looms, but that in an atmosphere of uncertainty, the trust needed for lasting reconciliation could be lost. Protecting the gains of peace is the great challenge of the negotiations to come. Fergal Keane, BBC News, on the island of Ireland.
Last Saturday, 82 girls were released by the Islamist militant group Boko Haram 3 years after they were kidnapped at gunpoint from their school in northern Nigeria. But they have yet to be reunited with their families. Another 21 girls released last October by the militants are still in government custody. Our correspondent Alistair Leithhead reports now from Yola in northeastern Nigeria.
The Chibok girls are now young women and getting used to being freed from their Boko Haram captors. After being kidnapped by the Islamists, they spent 3 years in the forest and are now a little overwhelmed by their new surroundings and by all the attention. Yakubu Nkeke is the family's representative. We met him heading to remote Chibok to pass on the message. He was asked to help identify the girls, find their relatives and arrange a reunion. Among the 82 released was his daughter.
When I first saw her, she jumped and grabbed me. I held her and started dancing around with her. Some of them.
He'll show the families his pictures and prepare for their big reunion. The girls told him life was hard under Boko Haram. Sometimes there was no food.
There are some of them, those that had been given in marriage. But according to them, it's not forceful.
What do you think about the Boko Haram fighters who kidnapped girls?
I will forgive them. I forgive them.
Young and impressionable, some may have fallen for their captors, brainwashed by Boko Haram. It's not just the 276 Chibok girls and their families who've been affected. Here in northeastern Nigeria, thousands of other women and girls have been kidnapped by Boko Haram. Most of those rescued have been left deeply traumatized. And there's a real stigma associated with anyone who's lived under Boko Haram. That is tearing apart communities. These are the girls rescued last year. They've been kept under the supervision of the security services for more than 6 months. They seem healthy. Some families just want them home. Others believe they're better off in the capital.
The parents agreed. We did not compel anybody that your child must be here. No way.
It's wrenchingly tough for the families waiting for news. We showed the Samuel family video footage of the released girls. They were looking for their Sarah, hoping to catch a glimpse. Sarah, sadly, is still being held by Boko Haram, with more than 100 others. But with so many freed and negotiations still going on, there's new hope they too will soon be released. Alistair Leithhead, BBC News, Yola, northeastern Nigeria.
Some football news, and Manchester United have beaten the Spanish side Celta Vigo to secure a place in the final of the Europa League. The United manager, Jose Mourinho, has called it the most important game of the club's history because winning the final would guarantee United a place in the Champions League next season. From Old Trafford, Andy Swiss has this report.
You could have your photo with a fake trophy at Old Trafford, but there is no substitute for the real thing. And tonight, United had the only silverware they've never lifted within their sights. The Europa League may be Europe's secondary tournament, but it's become United's top priority. Winning it, their best chance of Champions League qualification. The tension was nerve-shredding. Celta Vigo with one final chance, but United...
Yes, United fans will be breathing a hefty sigh of relief. That was some scare, but they are through to the final where they will play the Dutch side Ajax. So for United, the chance of another trophy and that all-important Champions League qualification, Hugh.
Andy, thanks very much. Andy Swiss there with the match report for us at Old Trafford. Newsnight is on BBC Two. Here's Emily.
So how radical is the Labour manifesto? Tonight, a detailed look at the politics, the policy and the reaction to Corbyn's vision for Britain. Join me now on BBC Two.
That's Newsnight with Emily here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.